There is so much with what you've said just then that is so offensive. It's hard to know where to start. The politician in me tells me that I should be saying that while I disagree with your views, I wholeheartedly respect them. But I find that very hard. I find it very hard to respect a lot of your views on what you've said, because I don't think it comes from a place of love. I think it comes from a place of hate.
And we can certainly recognize that there are tragic situations, where children are in need of rescuing, and sometimes they would be better off with two adults of the same sex. In fact, I share in the book that I traveled overseas with a lesbian couple who went to adopt a child with a significant special needs, and no heterosexual couple honestly had the balls to do it, and they did. And they said, you have a background in adoption, will you come? And I'd been good friends with them several years before, and I was like, let me check, hell yes, I will.
Thank you guys so much for joining us today. This is Katy Faust here with us on the John Chen Outs the World podcast. I'm John Chen, your host, and I'm so privileged to have Katy, this wonderful speaker, mom of 4 kids, and a speaker activist for children's rights. Thank you so much for joining us today, Katy.
我非常高兴跟你讲话. Wait a second. Wait. Wrong podcast.
Wow.
Sorry. It's so great to chat with you today. Thanks for having me.
Wow, painful. So Katy here can speak Chinese, and I learned about this first time meeting her. I was blown away, and her accents are really impeccable. Like, if there are any Chinese,
不敢当啊！哦哟，你嘴巴好甜呢。
My mouth is very sweet, she says. Yes, well, I'm speaking the truth. Really, she knows like all the little mannerisms and how to speak in such a very articulate way too in Chinese. It's incredible. Wow.
Thanks for giving me an outlet. Nobody speaks Chinese to me anymore.
Okay, well, now you didn't just do this as a hobby on the side. You did go to school and you studied Chinese, right?
Yeah. So did my undergraduate, my only graduate at St. Olaf in Minnesota, and I was an Asian studies and political science major. So I did Chinese all 4 years, really liked it, and then got a Fulbright scholarship to Taiwan. So my husband and I spent our first year of marriage in Taiwan, which was great. And then I worked for 4 years at a Chinese adoption agency. So I kind of had like 10 years of my life of being saturated in Chinese, and it was great. I just kind of like a season that I don't get to not as many touches with anymore.
Yeah. Well, that's why you have me here, because I'm Chinese, and you get to taste the flavors of Asia all over again.
I need it.
Yes.
I do.
Yes. Well, besides that, now you're very talented, because not only do you speak, you're an activist, you write legal cases as well, or you put them into government and policies as well. At least you speak for persons who are children, parents, families, who deal with this topic of family structure and dynamics. And this is your group called Them Before Us, correct? And you are the CEO of it. Can you tell us a little bit about that group?
Yeah. So the organization is called Them Before Us, and it's a nonprofit. And when people say, well, what's your goal? And I'm like, it's very simple, a global takeover. We are going to do a global takeover of all conversations about marriage and family, because what happens in every subject, like whether you're talking about divorce or you're talking about reproductive technologies or cohabitation or same-sex parenting or anything that has to do with family, those conversations are all obsessively focused on the desires of adults. Every single one, whether you're talking policy decisions or personal decisions, what the adults want drive decision-making and drives the narrative and drives the headlines so much of the time. And yet, when we get these questions wrong, it is children who suffer every single time. So Them Before Us is a nonprofit that defends children's rights to their mother and father. This is a universally recognized right. It is outlined in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, which every country in the world, except the United States, has signed. And so this may be foreign to some American listeners, but for those around the globe, much of this language and this recognition of the right to be known and loved by the two people responsible for your existence is already woven into a lot of their domestic policy. And so what we have found is that when you prioritize them, children, before us, adults, you come out with incredible policy. It's a template that you can lay over every single family structure and come up with a child honoring decision. And it's great because it's simple in the fact that if you honor children's rights, you get these answers correct. It's difficult in that to put them before us, every adult must sacrifice, right? It's nobody gets a pass when it comes to children's rights to their mother and father, single, married, gay, straight. Everybody has to accommodate and recognize and conform to the rights of children rather than expecting them to sacrifice so we can live as we please.
Wow. Now, you definitely have experience. I can see it from
No.
just you talking about that. Now, let's back up a little bit because you talked about this group, Them Before Us, and the main goals of it. You beautifully laid it out. Now, what is this group consisting of in terms of members? Are these religious fanatics? Are these people who are just thumping the Bible? Are they across the spectrum, or are they only the religious conservatives? It just sounds like this is something that comes out of my conservative friend group, you know?
Yeah, so for sure, there is one very mouthy Baptist pastor's wife who is in this organization. She may or may not be on a call wearing a mustard sweater at this moment, but she may or may not be recording this podcast in her husband's office. But the good news is that it's not religiously affiliated. We have, I've got two incredible Muslim scholars that have endorsed my book. We have Hindu supporters, we have Jewish supporters, we've got several Muslim supporters, several outspoken Muslim supporters. We have incredible gay supporters. We've got transgender supporters, because the incredible thing is that when you are standing on the side of natural rights, you actually get to build an incredible coalition. When it's not just, hey, here's this thing that Christians are going to do, or here's this thing that Muslims are going to do. When you say we are going to recognize natural law, right? The law that is evident through nature that can be substantiated using social science. What you get is you get an incredible coalition. And, you know, we have a section in chapter 4 of the book that's coming out on why marriage matters. And we talk about how it's strange that the 5 major religions of the world, the Jews, Christians, Muslims, Hindus, and Buddhists, they disagree about the nature of God, the nature of man, the nature of reality, the problem in the world, the solution to the problem, the nature of the afterlife. But they all agree on something that resembles man-woman marriage, right? All of them recognize that it's a pretty good idea for a man to commit to the woman he's making babies with for life, because that's good for man, woman, child, and all of society. So these are issues that have a lot more to do with being human than they do with being Baptist or being Sunni or being Jewish or being atheist. And we do have a lot of atheist followers and supporters as well, because again, you know, we're really just looking at human issues, and that means all of us can get on board.
Right. Now, you've already touched on this quite wonderfully about donor conception, adoptees, and kids who have gay parents, and people who are in your organization who seem to be progressive, trans, gay, and straight, whatever it is. You have multiple groups of people. Now, even though that's the case, do you ever feel like the opposition against you in the gay marriage debate has been largely looming because of emotional, or are they actually scientific reasons? Because we talk about your book, Them Before Us, and you seem to list down a lot of scientific research based on CDC, based on Princeton and other reviews. And you talk about how children in adoptive families or donor conceived situations don't fare as well as biologically intact families, including those of same-sex parent households. Now, can you give me a little bit brief description of why, and where's that information coming from? Because typically, if I can say one thing, is I've seen a lot of research on how gay couples don't fare any different from straight parents, biologically intact parents.
So there's a lot there. So let me just say that the people on the sort of traditional family side of things have always had the best research. We've always had the scholarship. We've always had the data. What we suck at is telling the stories, right? We have not made this a conversation where we're humanizing the victims of this, which is kids who lose their mom and dad, right? They're the ones that are the victims here. It's not adults not getting what they want. It's kids who are forced to sacrifice a relationship with one or both parents so adults can live as they please. So those are the victims. And we have really never been able to tell their stories well because those stories are very expensive to tell. For a kid to share about the pain they experienced in their upbringing, for a kid to talk about how difficult it was when mom ran off with the other guy, when dad came out and left the family, when the child conceived through sperm donation by a single mother by choice talks about their father hunger. You tell any of those stories and you're actually indicting the people that are raising you or the people that you're longing to stay in relationship with. And so we host a platform on our website and have folded many of those stories into the book to create a safe space for people to share their stories. So you can get a real life, honest look up close. What was the cost to this kid for their parents' decision? And we encourage them to use a pseudonym because there have been a couple times where people have not, and their family or their community have come after them for being honest. And so we just say that they're expensive stories. It's a lot easier for example, two guys to say we want to start a GoFundMe campaign to hire a surrogate because we want to be fathers and share that story than it is for the motherless child to grow up and then say, I desperately searched the faces of every woman I passed as a child, wondering if she could be my mother, right? And so we try to very much humanize the stories of the kids, the real victims in all of these conversations. So now let's talk directly about your question, for example, with same-sex parenting. So we spend a lot of time in the book. For chapter 1 is all about children's rights. Like, why do they have a right to their mother and father? What happens when we honor this right to their mother and father? What are the implications for society when children are connected to both of these adults daily for life? And the result is healthy kids, healthy adults, healthy society. Chapter 2, we talk about biology matters and how we have been studying family structure for decades. And so we know that biologically related parents interact differently with their children than non-biologically related parents. Statistically speaking, now, obviously, all of us know incredible step parents. All of us know incredible step parents, yes, who have stepped into the void of the missing parent. But when you look at things statistically, children don't fare better when stepdad joins the family. They fare just about as well as a single mom. In addition, thank God, most boyfriends or girlfriends or stepfathers and stepmothers are not abusive, but statistically speaking, the most dangerous person in a child's life is a cohabiting, unrelated man. And so kids are at risk when they lose a relationship with a biological parent. The non-biologically related parent does not tend to interact with kids in the same way. They tend to be less connected, less invested, less protective of kids. And we spend dozens of pages going through the research on that in chapter 2. Chapter 3, we talk about gender matters. We talk about the biologically determined differences between men and women and the distinct and complementary ways that men and women parent their children. So much so that many sociologists would say there's no such thing as parenting. There's only mothering and fathering. That's how different men and women are when it comes to child rearing. So those are the facts that sociologists who have been studying family structure agree on. Oh, and then they say marriage matters, right? That marriage does something that, for example, cohabitation doesn't do, that having your two biological parents married increases child outcomes and child thriving in a way that just living together doesn't. All right, so given that almost all social scientists agree on this, now we can ask the question of same-sex parenting. So the question is, why is it that for a child to be in a same-sex headed household, they have to lose a relationship with a biological parent, they have to be parented by a non-biological parent, they lose the complementarity of male and female, right? And they've experienced some kind of trauma, whether it's adoption or divorce or donor conception, right? All four things are at play here. Like deficits in all four areas where social scientists agree contribute to child thriving.
Right.
And yet we're somehow to believe that these studies show that there's no difference, right? So like that's the only, so like step parents, diminished outcomes, single parents, diminished outcomes, missing a mother presence or a father presence diminish child's outcomes. We know that adoptees don't fare as well. We know kids of divorce don't fare as well. We know that donor-conceived kids don't fare as well. And those are the only 3 ways that any of them are going to be in a same-sex headed household. And yet, miraculously, the studies show that kids in same-sex homes fare no different. And so there's something afoot. And that is that those studies, those like 75, like they did something like 75 studies prior to Obergefell, that showed that there was no difference. Many of them used the same sample group over and over and kind of reanalyzed them and called it a different study. But the bottom line is that when you look at those studies, they're methodologically flawed, right? They either rely on self-reporting, where the adults are simply saying, this is how I think my child is doing, rather than evaluating actual child outcomes. They use small sample sizes. They tend to not use random samples, rather they recruit their samples. So it's just not the scientific method that you were taught as a kid when it comes to like the gold standard of scientific research. So we actually spend the entire first half of the chapter 6 debunking all of the kids fare no different claims, and then going through what outcomes really, what we really know about them from the gold standard of research. And then we share the testimonies of kids who experienced the mother hunger that goes along with being raised by 2 dads, or the father hunger that goes along with being raised by 2 moms, and that this longing to be raised by a male and female parent exists even if you are well loved by 2 men or 2 women.
Wow. Oh, that's definitely very, very in-depth. Thank you for doing that. I think to kind of re-encapsulate most of what you said, I think really stood out was the gender difference between parents, and that really precedes the same-sex marriage debate. So parenting structure, how important that is, how does that affect children? That really has to be looked at first. And there is a conversation where you had on Australia national television, and you were having a debate with the Natalie and a Labour senator over there, and they were really railing you on this topic. You are hateful, you are closed-minded. And throughout the whole time, I will say you were very, very respectful. You had composure. I was very much rooting for you in ways because you seemed like the underdog when you were talking up there. I thought that what you had to say was meaningful and reasonable. Not that you ever came off as, well, she didn't have any research, she didn't have any good reasons to believe other than her faith. You actually said, no, this is a secular conversation we're having. You didn't bring up your faith at all. It was them that actually wanted to bring up your faith again and again and again. And so I think emotionally, I was really driven to their arguments because there was a gay parent in the audience, because there was a son who had a hooker mom who was using drugs, and he actually got into a safer environment with 2 gay men. So that really sold me on the idea, I think, emotionally, that, well, even though, Katy, you have very, very solid arguments in my understanding, I can't say, the research that you've brought up is going to be able to attack those liberal, progressive research that really kind of propels the gay marriage argument, right, that you have brought up. That may not be the best solid research out there. So I can't say that much, but I can say you were very, very reasonable and very, very articulate. You did not ever disrespect those audience members. Let's take a look.
So first I want to say, Jeannie, thank you for your question. I'm really grateful that you feel like you're able to speak up and share how you feel. Certainly that's not the case for a lot of kids with same-sex parents, because this debate has been framed as one that is based on prejudice. And what that does is it shuts down a real robust debate. And in our country, we really didn't have one. It was so demonized from the beginning that anybody that supported traditional marriage was doing so based on bias or bigotry or hatred or homophobia or something. And what it did is it totally shut it down, and people felt like they could not speak up. And the truth is that while there are people with religious convictions, obviously, members of your party feel that, this is based on their, deeply held religious beliefs. I think that our side needs to do a better job of making their case using natural law. And because I don't think that people should be accountable to my religion. I'm accountable to my religion.
Katy, our questioner, in fact, The lady next to our questioner has her hand up. Go ahead.
I'm Ginny's mother. I'd like to dispute your assertion that your voices have been shut down. In fact, your US Supreme Court in the Obergefell case heard all the evidence. They heard submissions from you, yourself, and from a lot of other people, and they heard all the evidence, and they found that it is the banning of gay marriage which is causing harm and humiliation to the children of same-sex couples. If you claim to speak for people like Ginny, if you claim to support her, why do you not support her right to have married parents?
Thank you for the question. So I'll say that there are organizations devoted to giving Jeannie a voice. And there is nobody that gives a voice to kids that may express some misgivings about their upbringing. As a matter of fact, I was in Adelaide 2 days ago, and in a 24-hour period, I have 2 women come to me, 2 separately, one in person and one that approached me on Twitter, who said, "This was my situation when I was young. I have never told anybody about it." One said, "For 20 years, I've never shared how I felt." And the other one said, "It has been 30 years since I left that house, and I never felt like I could talk to anybody because it seemed like everybody else had these glowing, household situations, and that didn't represent me." So on that flight home, I was sitting next to a woman who was from San Francisco, and we get into the chit-chat, and she says, "Well, what are you doing here?" And I'm always like, "Well, because, Americans, and they can be a little crazy." And I explained to her the connection between marriage and children's rights. And she said, "That's so fascinating. I've never heard that perspective before. I have never considered that children's rights was connected to the marriage issue at all." And so while a few of us were able to get briefs into the Supreme Court, the truth is that the American public has never really heard credible arguments on this issue from the other side because we've been shut out of media.
Katy,
because there aren't any.
Well, so let's talk about that.
Sam Dastiari wants to get in on this. I want to hear from the rest of our panel. So.
There is so much with what you've said just then that is so offensive. It's hard to know where to start. The politician in me tells me that I should be saying that while I disagree with your views, I wholeheartedly respect them. But I find that very hard. I find it very hard to respect a lot of your views on what you've said because I don't think it comes from a place of love. I think it comes from a place of hate. And I think that there is so much... I can't accept the fact that you believe that Jeannie's parents, who I'm no doubt love each other, that they're hurting their child simply because the love they have for one another. I can't accept that. I think so much... I worry that so much of your views stem not really with an issue with just marriage. I think some of it stems from an issue with homosexuality.
Considering that scientific studies on homosexual and non-traditional marriage and its effect on children have found that children raised by 2 same-gender parents do as well, on average, as children raised by 2 different gender parents, on what basis do you justify your claim that children have a right to have a relationship with their father and mother, and more specifically, only that combination of parents?
Good. Thank you so much for the question. I think this is really important. First of all, I make the basis of the claim that they have a right to the mother and father because it's one of the most self-evident rights out there, probably only trumped by a parent's right to the child that they bear. So, and that's something that's recognized in the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child that your country ratified in 1990. So it's widely accepted. Next, let's talk about the studies, because this is critical. That, interestingly, whenever you are studying family structure, when you are not talking about same-sex parenting, social scientists tend to agree on 3 things. Number 1, that non-biological parents tend to be more transitory, invest less time and energy and resources into kids, and be more dangerous to kids. Number 2, they find that anytime a child loses a parent, that trauma is involved, and that can affect a child in the long term. And then they also agree that men and women parent differently, and they offer distinct and complementary gifts to their kids. So whenever you're not talking about same-sex parenting, you're not studying same-sex households, social scientists agree on all of those 3 things. But suddenly, when you study same-sex households, even though all 3 of those are going to be a factor every single time, suddenly children fare just as well. Now, my question is, do you think that could possibly be because those studies that show that there's no difference do not use random samples, and that most of them derive their participants through recruited and volunteer studies.
Katie, can I just interrupt you, because we do actually have effectively a case study. It's a question that's come in from Craig Mack, and let's hear Craig's story and then the others can comment on this as well.
So, Katie, as a child, I grew up with my single drug-dealing, junkie, sometimes hooker mother in an environment that was surrounded by drugs, bikies, domestic violence, child abuse, drug overdoses, death and police raids. I could roll the perfect joint at 6 and so much more. At 15, I moved in with my gay uncle and his partner of 25 years. Only then did I experience a normal, stable, safe, structured environment that everybody else takes for granted. I've never understood the argument against marriage equality because of the potential damage to children. I'd be dead, in jail, or following in my mother's footsteps if it weren't for the 2 stable gay men who took me in. So my question to you is, as a child of 2 loving parents, can you explain the damage that that's done? And how are the risks any lesser with a straight couple?
Good. Thank you, Craig. So, So about 10 years ago, I was maybe more, I was invited by 2 women to travel with them to adopt a child that had special needs in an overseas institution. And I said, heck yes, I'm going with you. And I know, so hateful, huh? But I said, absolutely, right? That you are going to try and repair a damaged situation for a child. You're not inflicting motherlessness or fatherlessness on this child. Really, you are trying to repair something that has been lost, just like so many grandparents do and so many aunts and uncles do when the relationship between mother and father break down and that child is in need of some kind of rescue. And in that situation, I would say that adoption agencies need to have all options on the table because you're trying to repair a broken situation. But what we don't want is a system or a family structure that permits intentional fatherless and motherlessness. And because government's interest in marriage is children, it's not how you feel about somebody. Government's interest in marriage is children. And so redefining marriage redefines parenthood into an institution where mothers and fathers are not necessary and they're optional. And that's really not the case in the life of a child. When a child loses a parent, the ones I've talked to, they tend to mourn the loss of that parent. So while I absolutely would say we've got to get in and do life with couples that are doing their best to help a child in a broken situation, that's very different than institutionalizing a family structure where
Katie,
children will always lose one or the other.
I'm sorry to draw you to a conclusion on that point, but I want to hear from the other panellists. Richard Di Natale.
Well, I suppose I'm a little concerned that we've gone from equal marriage, which is a very different debate, to parenting, and let's accept that. I mean, we support, and as a society, the right of same-sex couples to be parents, and we do it because, look, there's lots of pseudoscience and gobbledygook out there about the effects on kids. Almost every study demonstrates that the most important factor is whether a child is raised in a loving household.
That's actually not what the studies say, though.
Your case study demonstrates that. It's not biology that influences whether you've got a happy, healthy, well-balanced child. It's whether they grow up in a loving household. And if there's any issue that kids growing up in an environment with same-sex parents have to face, it's the discrimination towards their parents. And it's that issue that we should be tackling, not this nonsense argument about whether people of the same sex should be able to raise a child. I mean, we've had that debate. That's gone. We're now having a debate around marriage and whether people should be able to marry. And look, Brendan, your issue of, this is a straw man, that suddenly all these advocates are out there waiting to storm cake shops because they support gay marriage. It's nonsense. And of course, I accept we're in a pluralist society and you have to accept that people have different views. But you should also be prepared to name it. And the issue with marriage is this for me. Marriage is an expression of love and commitment between 2 people. That's what it is. Now, why do we say that one couple should be entitled to express that love and commitment publicly, and yet another couple can't do that? The only justification for that is that you think that the love between those people is somehow lesser, it's worth less, it's not as important, and it's different. And that's what prejudice is.
So you see that, and you see, Katy, you definitely were railed by these senators and speakers. How do you respond to people who think that you are this bigot? You even ran a blog by your own intention, named it Ask the Bigot. Why did you do that? And how did you believe that was somehow supposed to spark conversations around this current program that you have at Them Before Us?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter way too much. And somebody wrote a letter that said, okay, this is my tipping point. I'm out. Right. And it was some teacher in a school district where they had been, some private school was segregating training classes by race. And she said, okay, I'm out. I'm out. I've put up with this as long as I can, but I'm out. And so somebody said, what's your tipping point? Right. All of us, that have finally decided to kind of speak out or speak up about some issue. A lot of times there's something that's been so egregious that you've seen in the world that made you go, okay, I'm out. So for me, it was when I heard people pushing for gay marriage, saying kids don't care if they lose a mother or father, right? Or when they said kids don't need moms and dads, right? Any two adults will do. That's when I went, okay, I'm out. I'm out. Like, no, I love gay people, right? And obviously, if you read the book, you'll see that my mom is in a relationship with another woman. They've been together since I was 10. I love them both. This is not about animus, right? This is about the idea that men and women can be swapped in or out of a child's life with zero impact to their development and identity and well-being, which is a sociological lie. So in that clip, that you showed, like, what are we supposed to do with those kinds of stories? And I would say, really, you have to match story with story, right? And that's why I'm saying the other side tells a better story, right? And so funny because I know people that tried to get into that audience, and they wouldn't let them. Like, they're like, no, we already have the people picked that we want to come, and so they kind of stacked the audience members for Q&A.
Right. Kind of seemed like
Right?
that. Yeah.
Oh, setup, baby, total setup,
But
right? This
very
is not a
provocative,
neutral
though.
platform.
Very
Yeah.
provocative.
Totally. And so, like, but you've got to match story with story, right? So like, we've got stories on our website of, in fact, Samantha Weissing, who is our director of development, she came to us because she was like, you're the only place I know where I can, like, be honest about this. And her story is, I was raised by two men, my dad and his boyfriend, in a world that was totally just a male world. Like, I didn't have my mom. I only had a little brother. I didn't even know what a mother was until I was a 5-year-old in my kindergarten class, and we watched The Land Before Time. And then I saw that this little dinosaur was crying because he lost his mother. And then I realized there's a thing, it's called mother, and I don't have one.
Wow.
And she said, I spent the rest of the day crying in the arms of my teacher. And she said, after that, I would go up to any woman that showed me any amount of affection. I'd go up to a teacher or my dad's gay friends, my dad's lesbian friends. And like, within a minute, if they showed me affection, I'd say, will you be my mother? Even as a 6-year-old, even as a 7-year-old. And so, we share a lot of stories like that in the book about kids who say, I was well loved by two women, or I was well loved by two men, but I craved a mother. I craved a father. And then I started to feel guilty because I wanted a father, but everybody was telling me, oh, you're so lucky you have two moms. So then I started to hate myself. Like, I must be such a bad person for wanting a dad. Who am I to reject the love of this other parent? And the world is telling me that I should be happy. And yet, why do I want this missing person so bad? And so, like, until you really familiarize yourself with the stories of kids, the statistics aren't going to mean very much. And so that's one thing that we try to do, is really humanize, like, these are the people that are really being affected. And we can certainly recognize that there are tragic situations, where children are in need of rescuing, and sometimes they would be better off with two adults of the same sex. In fact, I share in the book that I traveled overseas with a lesbian couple who went to adopt a child with a significant special needs, and no heterosexual couple honestly had the balls to do it, and they did. And they said, you have a background in adoption, will you come? And I'd been good friends with them several years before, and I was like, let me check. Hell yes, I will. And so we went, and it was a really tough trip.
Yeah.
It's been a really tough life. But they have offered this child, life. I don't think that child would have made it if she had continued in the orphanage. And so you can recognize that there, like the person in the audience, that there's tragic situations where having two men raise you or two women raise you is the better option. None of that justifies saying mothers and fathers don't have integral, critical, distinct benefits to kids. None of that justifies saying that you can swap parents in and out with zero effect on the child. None of that justifies reorganizing your idea about what marriage is and the social benefits to society, just because in a few exceptional cases, sometimes kids would be better off with same-sex parents.
Right. Well, coming from that, I'm very much admiring you for your stance, because that's a very, very hard stance to have, not only on a social level, because we are so gay friendly and accepting, which, has benefited me. I came out in high school, and then in college, I came out publicly. And having that Christian background now, becoming a Christian in my faith, I think just having those two different ends definitely are polar. I mean, I wish there was spaces that were just very neat and clean. You could just come in without assuming, okay, is he pro gay marriage, or is he pro traditional marriage? Is he with a boyfriend, or is he going to be celibate and marry a girl? So that's my personal experience. I definitely feel that pull, that tug, definitely coming from my own experience being a child of divorcees. And I mean, it's never pretty to have parents split up. Never. It's never ideal. And I think we just become so normalized to it as a society. So there's multiple things that it seems like you're saying is going on. Not only the high divorce rates, the children out of wedlock, but also this push for making the definition of marriage a lot more open. Inclusivity is such a great thing, right? But then to what cost?
Yeah, we spend a lot of time talking about in chapter 4, the whole chapter is devoted to marriage, and how marriage has been the most child-friendly institution the world has ever known, because it is the only relationship that unites the two people to whom children have a natural right, their mother and father. And while there's lots of different things that we can call marriage these days, from a children's rights perspective, um, marriage is the union that brings together the two people to whom they have a natural right, the one that unites their biological identity in one place, the one that offers 100% maternal and 100% paternal love every single day, and the relationship that provides, from the best calculus that we've been able to find so far in this human life, the most stability for a child. And how we talk about in the book that there's 3 staples of a child's social emotional diet: mother's love, father's love, and stability. Those are like the macronutrients. If you're missing one of those, the kid is going to be emotionally malnourished. And that's why we see kids who struggle with family breakdown, struggling in school, disproportionately suffering with addiction, or more involved in criminal activity, more likely to become teen parents. I mean, every social issue that we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to try to prevent today has something in common, and that is those demographics are overpopulated with children who don't have mother's love, father's love, and or stability, right? But marriage is the thing that brings all those 3 things together for kids. Same-sex marriage doesn't do the same thing. Polygamy doesn't do the same thing. Single mother by choice doesn't do the same thing. Divorced parents who are splitting custody doesn't do the same thing, right? All of those different modern families, we talk about this in the book, is modern family is really just code for child loss. The kid had to lose something to be in that arrangement. And sometimes tragedy strikes, and you do what you can, to salvage what's going on in the child's life. But right now, we are now flipping the script, in this progressive world, and we are saying that that kind of child loss is progressive. It's good. They like it, and that's garbage. That's garbage. I have not yet met a kid who lost their mom and dad who said that was the best thing that's ever happened to me. A lot of times they say, well, I figured it out. I got over it. I've worked through it. It was painful, but I'm okay. Yeah. But then I say, well, would you incentivize it? Would you endorse it? Would you encourage other people to recreate that childhood for their kids? And most of them would say, oh no. I mean, I got out of it, but that was tough. And so what we're doing in our policy, in our laws now is we are literally stripping the words mother and father from a lot of parenthood laws. We are saying that your intent to parent makes you a parent rather than biological connection. And that just means that if I want the kid, I should be able to have the kid. Now, this is something that adoption agencies would absolutely lose their license for, right? Adoption agencies recognize that if you're placing a kid with a non-biologically related parent, you better, like me, I'm an adoptive mom, go through screening, vetting, background checks, criminal checks, references, home studies, studying our other kids. I mean, like, there's a lot of scrutiny because saying my intent to parent does not prove that I'm going to be a good parent, right? And so we know that like the adoption world has built decades of best practice around making sure that if a kid is going to be raised by a non-biological parent, that parent had better prove themselves. But our parenthood laws now, in the name of progress, right, are saying if you can acquire a kid and you intend to parent, especially if you get them through reproductive technologies, you can walk out of the hospital with that kid, whether or not you've got a genetic connection to them. So there's just a lot going on in the marriage and family world that is really concerning.
Right. Wow. Just mind blowing too. Just on layer on layer on layer. Now, I want to take one of those things because there's a thread that you mentioned talking about, again, family structure, huge core tenet within this argument. And something that continues to branch off into many different directions, whether it's donor conception, gay parents and having children adoptees, etc. But one factor that we as a society here in America really focus in on right now is the racial debates, right? Where is this racial systemic oppression coming from exactly? And you brought up something when you were talking about motherlessness, fatherlessness, etc. That one word in the middle, fatherlessness, comes up again and again and again. And Black scholars, conservative, liberal, all agree, have stated this. Fatherlessness is the major contributor. Let me read something that you wrote. According to the What We Believe page on blacklivesmatter.com, Black Lives Matter seeks to disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family, which is the only institution that binds children to their fathers. Going forward, Black Lives Matter do matter. And I'm all in when it comes to fighting racism, lowering crime rates in the Black community, raising up Black scholars, examining prison sentencing guidelines, and lifting Black children out of poverty. But none of these goals will be attained unless we fight for Black children's right to be raised by their mother and father. This is startling because you say in another section, from 1890 to 1950, Black women had a higher marriage rate than white women, despite open racism and widespread poverty. Today, only 17% of Black children in America will graduate high school having lived exclusively with their married mother and father. In other words, the vast majority, a full 83%, will experience family breakdown or instability of some kind before they launch into adulthood. You bring up other examples. You talk about how Barack Obama even gave a speech at some 10,000 plus Black church about how he didn't have a father growing up. You bring up Erik Erikson, a very well-known developmental psychologist, how he didn't have a father. And he actually coined the term identity crisis. Going forward, Warren Farrell, who was a feminist, I believe, but then he's now advocating for men's rights. Is that correct? He wrote The Boy Crises. He notes prisons are basically centers for dad-deprived boys. Blacks are overrepresented in prison populations not because Black men and women are more prone to criminality, but because 70% of them are born to single mothers. Again, you have reasons to believe in what you believe in, right? And I think for many of us, especially my more liberal leanings, myself and my friends, just look at your overall appeal and it's like, that's kind of racist, that's kind of closed-minded, that's religious jargon and so forth. But really, you're coming out of it from, not out of the woodworks, you're coming out of it from the research that people who are activists for those who are incarcerated and those in the Black community, those whose children, again, are not faring as well. There's huge, massive disparities within these minority populations, Black, Hispanic, otherwise, compared to the white community. So this is also a racial issue, is it not?
Yeah, and I'm happy to have conversations about sentencing reform, criminal justice reform. Um, what can we do, to help Black students? Like, let's have those conversations. But if you don't have the spine to address the family issue, get out of the conversation.
Hmm.
Sorry, I know that it's unpopular, but that is the defining aspect of whether or not kids succeed or fail. And we are starving our Black kids. Thomas Sowell, I believe we quoted him in the book as well. He said, Black families survived hundreds of years of slavery and Jim Crow, but they could not survive the liberal welfare state.
Hmm.
Right? It is the liberal welfare state that undid the Black family through these helpful policies. So like we need to look at what are we doing that disincentivizes fathers, Black fathers, who actually studies show that Black fathers tend to spend more time with their kids than white fathers do. I mean, this has nothing to do with racial inadequacy at all. And it has everything to do with policies that de-incentivize Black families remaining together. And it is a crime that we are starving our Black students, right? We are stacking the deck against them so tall that it's like no amount of affirmative action is able to pull them out of it because they are not getting what they need, which is their own dad. So I mean, like, yeah, there's problems going on in the Black community that I want us all to get on the same page about. But if you're not talking about the fact that 71% of Black kids begin life with a single parent, then honestly, you're just closing your eyes. You're just not willing to really take the issue seriously.
Hmm. Wow, that's cutting. It's very cutting. Now, you have, again, those arguments about the single parent household and the rates therein. Now, you also talk about a time when you took in a single mother yourself and their kid, and you were startled. I'm startled even having to read this right now. So in 2008, the Institute for American Values conducted the only study to date intended to estimate the cost of family breakdown to the US's bottom line. It found that children living apart from one or both parents cost taxpayers roughly 112 billion, that's with a B, billion every year. That's enough to power the economies of Nicaragua, Namibia, Mozambique, Madagascar, Mongolia, Macedonia, Rwanda, the Congo, Malawi, Botswana, and Afghanistan for a year. What? Do I have to look at that again? I mean, it's 112 billion. Did you get that right? Is this
Yeah,
study
and I believe, and that study's like from 10 years ago or something,
10 years ago?
right?
So
So,
it must, you're saying with that in mind, it must be increasing.
right. Oh, 100%, right? Because family breakdown is not getting better. You read that quote out of a section in chapter 1 about why Republicans should care about children's rights. And it is that if you really care about small government, lowering your taxes, then you had better secure children's individual rights to their mother and father. Because if you don't, the government will just become replacement father, replacement mother, replacement family. And that means tons and tons of money that does not actually help kids. Why? Because the government can't love a child. Only the mom and dad can do that. So then we go on and we talk about why Democrats should care about children's rights. And we list like the major social issues that we're battling today, from like child homelessness, child poverty, behavioral issues, substance abuse issues, trafficking that feeds into homelessness, teen pregnancy, like every major social issue. You drill down, and what you've got fatherless kids, right? Fatherless kids that are making up the kids that are populating, the suicide hotline, right? Or the kids that are getting the free and reduced lunches. Like, fine, I love it. Like, please continue to volunteer with big brothers and big sisters. But if you are not also defending children's rights to their mother and father, your efforts are just a little band-aid over a gaping wound, right? A $112 billion gaping wound that is not helping anything. But rather, we're not helping kids unless we can get this right.
Exasperating, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
If you're not using the right tools to be able to help this situation, that wound, that injury is just going to prove to be futile. Not only futile, but exasperate the issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. Incredible. Well, I definitely wanted to ask you that, and I'm so glad that you talked about, what do Democrats and Republicans share in value? Because we're all human, and you're not coming
Mhm.
from a place of hatred. I'm not convinced of that. You're coming from a place of civility and honesty, but also unity in this one central issue. I know there are liberal professors, academics who have talked about this, even when I was at college, at university. And my conservative counterparts understand this just from a very basic American, maybe Christian value stemming from that area as well. So, what would you say, given this last 5 minutes, what would you have to appeal to audiences who may be on the progressive left, but also those Republicans, as you've just mentioned, but really those more so who are opposed to your idea that, yes, same sex marriage, okay, it's not just about same sex marriage, it's about parenting. But we deserve love, we deserve equality, we deserve rights here as well.
Mhm.
And who who is it that you would dare question that, right? Who would be
Mhm.
that Katy Faust? What would you have to say?
Yeah. So first, I think that Republicans and Democrats can find a lot of common ground here, because everybody, I really do think everybody loves this country, and we've got really good, noble goals. I mean, like all of those goals of like reducing these major social ills that we're facing. Yes, yes, let's do that, please. But don't pretend like you can just pump and dump tons and tons of money into after school programs and think you're fixing it, because you're not. And then obviously I'm a little more on the conservative side, and I want small government and I want low taxes. But you know what that takes? It takes a moral and religious people, honestly, in the words of our founders. You don't get moral people. You don't get people that are able to really like exert the self-control, be responsible citizens, if you are not if you are not feeding them, if their social emotional diet is not filled with these staples that they need to thrive emotionally, physically, academically, right, relationally. And so this is the thing on which all of us should agree. And when it comes to marriage, um, like men and women are different. Kids have a right to their mom and dad. And what we have learned when we have redefined marriage is what we've actually done is we've redefined parenthood. Every place that gay marriage goes, the rights of children to their mother and father are weakened. And so we have a section in chapter 4 where we go through country after country that have redefined marriage, and we've watched how that decision has impacted children's rights. And so for all of the talk that some advocates made before Obergefell that this doesn't have anything to do with kids, marriage does not necessarily have anything to do with kids. Well, we've learned through the redefinition of marriage that it 100% has to do with kids, because that marriage change has resulted in parenting change, because these two things have always gone together, right? Marriage at its core has value to society, not because government is putting its stamp of approval on your love life, but because children need both their mom and dad raising them together every day to thrive. And the government has an interest in incentivizing that union in a way that it doesn't have in incentivizing other unions. Nobody would argue, I certainly don't, that gays and lesbians cannot form deeply committed relationships. What I'm saying is that they can never give the same thing to a child, right? Two men and two women simply will never be able to offer or replicate what that child's own mother and father will give to them. And that's why it's different, right? It doesn't have to do with the emotional commitment or even the morality or, the goodness of the person. It has to do with men and women coming together, do something that no other relationship does, and therefore it deserves protection. And from a children's rights perspective, redefining marriage has done incredible harm to the rights of children. And people need to know about that. Now, I will say one more thing, because I talk and I will keep talking. We make it really clear in the book that there's equal opportunity offenders when it comes to children's rights. Like the whole redefinition of the family didn't begin with gay marriage. It began with no fault divorce, right? That was the original redefinition of marriage. The the American family being in shambles today is not because of the gays. It is because of heterosexuals, honestly, who decided that their kids' lives should bend around their romantic inclinations, whether that looked like cohabitation or no fault divorce, or just a lot of, what I said on Twitter the other day, a lot of single moms are single moms because they were the only the only parent willing to act like an adult in the relationship, because in America, we have imbibed this message that you do you, do what makes you happy. Well, when adults do it, make themselves happy, a lot of the times that means the kids get stiffed. And so that is a cultural message that has been incredibly damaging to American kids when it comes to adults and their sexual and romantic preferences, right? The boom in the reproductive markets, in terms of using sperm donors and egg donors, originally that wasn't driven by gays and lesbians. That was driven by infertile heterosexual couples. And so, like I said at the beginning, in the world of children's rights, nobody gets a pass. In the world of children's rights, every adult must conform to the rights of kids. And that's hard. That's why throughout the book we say, what is the solution? Adults need to do hard things, right? They need to do hard. If you're the infertile heterosexual couple, that is hard. Struggling with infertility is a crushing load. But just because you desperately want a child, that does not justify severing a child's relationship with one biological parent for life. My husband's a pastor, so we do a lot of marriage counseling. The things that married couples struggle with are hard. Pornography, financial troubles, unemployment, difficult parenting situations. It's hard, and it can stress a marriage to the point where both adults can think, it'd be better if we just get out of this. No. When it's not a situation of abuse, or addiction or abandonment, no, work it out. But that's hard. For somebody who experiences same-sex attraction, who would be an incredible dad or an incredible mom, right? Thinking about, how am I going to fulfill this longing that I have? The answer is, I don't know. But making a child conform to your romantic desires for a family is an injustice if it means severing them from their mother or father. That whatever parenthood looks like, it has to conform to the rights of children. Being a 45-year-old woman who would be an amazing mother but has never met Mr. Right, thinking my biological clock is ticking, it's now or never. It is hard to say, no, I'm not going to raise a fatherless child intentionally. Instead, I'll find other ways to tap into that maternal longing that I have. That's hard. But the thing is that it is an injustice if the strong, who are the adults, ask the weak, the children, to sacrifice so they can have what they want. That is simply not how a just society operates. A just society expects the strong to do the hard thing instead of insisting that the weak do the hard thing.
Wow. No, there's a lot of imperatives that I feel like we'll never be able to, I don't know, even in my generation, but hopefully we'll see some headway. Hopefully we'll see some movement, especially with what you're doing with them before us. And the children need advocates. Our children need advocates. We need children who are raised up in healthy, robust households. And that's something that I think everyone across the board can advocate for, regardless of political lines, religious backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds. So thank you.
Yeah,
so
agree.
much. Thank you. This was profound.
Yeah.
It was a deep dive, but we made it out. I'm breathing it. Okay. Now.
Yeah, good. Well, thank you for having me. I love it. I love these long conversations. I love the hard questions. There's like you and I were chatting a little beforehand. Not enough people are giving satisfying answers to a lot of these questions. And Them Before Us is not a religious organization, but I definitely fault the church for not having good answers to a lot of these questions.
Yeah. Well, where can we reach you? Because I want people to get a hold of you, and if they have any way of just reading some of those stories on Them Before Us, thembeforeus.com. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm. That's it. Yeah, we're on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. But thembeforeus.com is where you can really get it. Honestly, the book is honestly like 10 chapters, and each chapter could have been its own book. We tried our best to distill the best research on every topic. And then include the stories. So you really, really I mean, like, that's probably the most important thing about the book is it's stories that you really won't hear anywhere else. And it helps you understand who the real victims are and what the cost to them is when we get these questions wrong. So it's a resource, you know, for all of these questions, divorce, cohabitation, polygamy, same-sex parenting, reproductive technologies, surrogacy, adoption. We didn't talk a whole lot about adoption, but there's a lot of questions about how adoption fits into all of this. And so we really do our best to try to kind of answer that question as well.
Right. Well, you always do it in a very nuanced and tasteful way, very respectful. Katy,
Thank you.
thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, thanks. Take care.